So, I think most of us are aware of the fraught history between England and Ireland. And those of us with part English, part Irish heritage, like myself, are only too aware of it. Pirate Queen and Irish legendary heroine Grace O'Malley, Gráinne na Mhaol, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong because I don't speak Irish, sadly, is an integral part of that history. Now, I was vaguely aware of her story, but it was a visit to the west of Ireland to trace my own ancestral roots, and upon seeing this quote about Gráinne from her English adversaries, that persuaded me she needed to be profiled. So her English adversaries said about her, "She is a woman who hath imprudently passed the part of womanhood." A woman who has dared to be imprudently unwomanly. Now, this sounds like the sort of woman I like. That statue there, the image is of Gráinne at Westport House in the west of Ireland, in Westport. So Gráinne O'Malley was born around 1530 in Mhaol, Connaught, the only child of a Gaelic aristocratic clan who traded goods by land and sea and engaged in piracy. Coming from this sort of elite background, she would have been well educated. So she married Donald O'Flaherty of the ruling Flaherty clan, aged 16. And under Gaelic law at the time, married women retained their own property, unlike in English law, where they were forced to surrender it to their husbands. Married women were also able to purchase further property, and Gráinne acquired her own ships and men, and she took over chieftainship of her husband's clan when he proved to be inept. Already she was proving herself to be quite the leader. Upon her husband's death soon after, Gráinne moved to Clare Island off the coast of the west of Ireland. It was here that she established her reputation as the Pirate Queen by defending and protecting her land and waters with piracy and not being afraid to attack back. So she married again in 1567, this time a man called Richard Bourke, and together the pair had quite a fiery relationship where Gráinne would throw him out of the house regularly, but all in all it was a successful alliance. They battled against the English overlords who were, under Elizabeth I, constantly attempting to levy increasing taxes and take over Irish land. You see, Ireland had been dominated and owned by the English since Henry VIII's time. The English landowners lived alongside the native Irish, who retained power via alliances with powerful clans and families. Subsequently, there was a lot of feuding and upheaval, with native Irish clans doing what they could to survive at the time. So in 1584, after Gráinne's husband's death, Sir Richard Bingham, who you see there a portrait of, became the English Crown President of Connaught. The policy of the English was to anglicise and control Ireland completely, and Gráinne was, by this point, 53. She was a wealthy Irish woman of power, and Bingham was not a fan of the Irish because he famously said, "The Irish were never tamed with words, but with swords." He saw Gráinne as the principal source of rebellion and took one of her sons hostage for a year. He then seized another son's lands, this son was called Owen, and killed him. Gráinne obviously was incensed by this and started organising a rebellion against Richard Bingham. She was temporarily imprisoned on his orders and then forced to flee to Ulster and remain in exile. Bingham was then called to Flanders and left Ireland, yay! And Gráinne appealed to the English for a pardon for herself and her children. She got it, but Bingham still wanted revenge against her. So during the Armada, Bingham ordered English troops to root out the rebels, including Gráinne, and kill them. The rebels rose up again, and Connaught was in turmoil. Bingham laid waste to Gráinne's lands and fleet and left her homeless, effectively. Her son Theobald had no choice but to submit to the English. It didn't seem to help him much, though, as he and his brother Murat were implicated in yet another rebellion plot and charged with treason against the crown. So Gráinne had no choice. Having lost everything and potentially, the execution of two more of her children, she had to appeal to the Queen herself. So Gráinne set sail for England in 1593. Now, despite efforts by Bingham to deny her an audience with the Queen and have her executed, Elizabeth I, maybe partially intrigued by this gutsy Irish woman of legend, she agreed to meet with her. Now, Gráinne by this point was in her 60s, about the same age as Queen Liz herself, and she pleaded her old age and poverty. Yet she still promised to defend the Queen against enemies with sword and fire if the Queen would pardon her past activities, restore her property to her, and spare the lives of her sons. She also made sure she didn't let Bingham off the hook. She informed the Queen of how he had stolen her property, imprisoned her, and willfully murdered her son without trial. Apparently, the meeting was conducted in Latin, which both women spoke fluently. So there are many legends about this meeting, and the drawing that you see there on the screen is the most famous rendition of the meeting. The most common legends are, first of all, that Gráinne refused to bow to the Queen as she didn't recognise her as the Queen of Ireland. But I do find this hard to believe because, Gráinne was in a desperate situation and she would have been on the charm offensive. The other legend is that at the meeting, Gráinne apparently blew her nose, then threw into the fire a lace handkerchief that the Queen's lady-in-waiting had given her as a gift. Now, again, I think this is probably English propaganda that frequently pitted the Irish as, uncivilised savages. Although she didn't restore her property in full, the Queen did pardon Gráinne's rebellious past actions and recommended that her sons be released and Gráinne be provided with a pension. Bingham was ordered to leave them in peace, which obviously is a result because, Gráinne must have totally charmed Queen Elizabeth I, who was not known, as everybody knows, to suffer fools gladly. The Queen even said of her, "As long as she lives, I remain confident that she will continue a dutiful subject." Now, I don't know about you, but I'd love to be a fly on the wall in that meeting. But surprise, surprise, Bingham didn't follow his restraining order and he ordered English troops to accompany Gráinne and her sons back to Ireland. Excuse me, and obliged them to be stationed on her lands, forcing her to feed the troops. Because she was so poor by this point, she petitioned the Queen in London yet again in 1593, explaining what Bingham was doing, and this time Bingham was brought to justice. He fled to England and he was imprisoned. But it wasn't peace yet for Gráinne. The rebel clan leaders continued to try to assert power over the English, and Gráinne and her sons had two choices: the crown or the rebels. They apparently reached an agreement with the crown. In the end, she allied herself with the English, but she had no choice. Her son Theobald later became Viscount of Mhaol, thanks to Charles I. So Gráinne died in 1603, the same year as Elizabeth I. Her true story is shrouded in many different myths and legends, but I think many parallels can be drawn between Gráinne and her adversary, represented by the English Queen. Not only were they born and died around the same time and in the same years, but they were both women who held and commanded power in their respective lands, and apparently they seem to recognise and respect that in each other too. I think the legendary meeting between Gráinne and Elizabeth is an early example of women supporting women. But of course, there are stark differences between them. Gráinne was not a monarch of an empire, so they were not equals. Gráinne did whatever it took to protect and preserve her family's rights. She was a brave and courageous woman who fought against the forces that conspired against her, namely imperialism and misogyny. In many ways, Gráinne and Elizabeth are symbolic of the historic battle between the Irish and the English. Gráinne is not just a feminist icon, but an icon of Ireland itself. And the image that you see behind is Rockfleet Castle, Gráinne's home and reportedly where she died. Thanks for listening. I'll be back soon with another herstory of the month.